Good afternoon, everyone. This is the first in a series of videos where I show you how to paint a scene of the River Arun in Sussex in watercolour. As the series progresses, you will see the painting develop from start right through to the end. And what I'm going to demonstrate is the importance of planning the sequence of your washes and how that affects your ability to manage the edges of shapes and elements in a watercolour painting. Now, if you're new to my channel, thanks ever so much for tuning in, and of course you're most welcome. I'm Oliver Pyle, I'm a landscape painter from England, and I'm based in Sussex, and most of what I paint are landscapes close to me or down in the county of Dorset, where I spend quite a lot of time too. Now, over the past few months, I've taken a break from making YouTube tutorials just because there's been a number of other things that have been very pressing. There's been projects that are time critical that I've needed to complete and a whole lot of different things going on. Funnily enough, during that time, I spent a little while looking at some of the content that exists on YouTube and what it is that everyone looks at and watches and consumes in terms of learning how to paint the landscape and learning how to paint in watercolours. What I found is that there is an unbelievable amount of content that's available, but much of it falls into, how shall I say, an entertainment bracket as opposed to an educational one. What I mean by that is that videos are created often, sometimes once a week, and it might be, how to paint a beach on week 1, and then it'll be how to paint a beach at low tide week 2, how to paint a beach at high tide week 3, and then the same in the summer, the autumn, the winter, and that's great, and these videos are enjoyable to watch. But what I noticed is that they're not really teaching any new techniques or any techniques that are different from one video to the next. Now, set alongside that are the messages, the emails that I receive from you regularly, and I really enjoy getting those, so thanks very much for sending them through. But one thing is quite evident, and it's this issue of how to plan a watercolour painting, how to deal with some of the problems that occur with regard to managing edges, and that suggests to me that that content doesn't really exist. And I think you're right, it's very difficult to find, but it is an issue of high importance to most of you. And I know that for many years as I was learning how to paint watercolour, it was something that I just really struggled with. I couldn't quite work out how to put this puzzle together such that I'd end up with a painting that I was happy with at the end. So that's what this is all about. This is what I'm going to do in the course of this series of videos, so that hopefully you've got something at the end that will help you to paint with more confidence and to become a more versatile painter where you're able to tackle any subject you want. Now, when I say become a more versatile painter, what I mean by that is I want you to be able to have the skills and techniques in your toolkit that will enable you to paint whatever scene inspires you. Over the last few years, as I've taught more and more online on courses, in writing my book, which is due out towards the end of November, it's become very clear that the number of essential techniques that are required for painting watercolour are surprisingly few. You would think, looking at the weight of content that exists, that there'd be a huge number of different techniques that we need to understand and grasp in order to paint watercolour successfully. But that's not the case. The more you become familiar with watercolour painting in a landscape context, you'll realise that the skills that you need and the skills you should develop and practice are applicable just as much to painting a beach as they are to painting a woodland, as they are to painting a townscape. Whatever it is you're painting often requires you to deploy very, very similar techniques. What you will see as this series progresses is that these two highly important techniques or concepts of planning your washes and managing the edges of shapes and elements in a painting are central to almost everything that you want to paint. Let me give you an example of this. I think one of the things that I'm asked most with regard to subjects and how to paint them is how to paint rocks. Well, sometimes thinking in those terms masks a more important issue. All rocks are a combination and often a jumble of different shapes. And the reason that they pose a problem to many people in watercolour painting is that there's a large number of edges that are overlapping, and that becomes a difficult thing to paint. But it's not about whether or not you know how to paint rocks. It's whether or not you know how to manage edges. It's the same if you're painting a street scene and you've got lots of buildings and some are overlapping each other. You're not painting rocks, but you are deploying exactly the same techniques in order to paint them. So as we work through this series, you will see that what we're looking at in terms of technique here is something that is applicable to almost everything that you can paint. That will therefore make you a more versatile painter. So when you next come to paint a boat, for example, that you've not painted before, you won't say, well, I've never really painted that type of boat before, so I'm not really sure how to paint it. No, instead you'll say, okay, I haven't painted that type of boat before, but I understand that the techniques that I need to do that are just the same as other things that I've painted before. I can see that by planning my washes, and I can see that by managing the edges of these shapes, I will be able to paint that subject. So that's where we're going to go with this series. Okay, just a little bit of admin, just so you know how this is all going to work as we go forward. I think that each video is likely to be somewhere between 20 minutes to 30 minutes long. I will keep them relatively manageable, and each time I will be developing a specific part of the painting and showing you specific techniques under this broad heading of planning washes and managing edges. All the filming is going to be done, and then these will be released probably every fortnight. But have a look at my Instagram page or Facebook, YouTube, and I will keep you updated as to how these are all going to drop. What I'm hoping to do across these videos is to show you that as the painting builds up, you'll start to see that the primary issue here, the cause of these technical problems that we have, is planning your washes. The management of edges is the secondary issue, the symptoms, if you like. The reason we struggle with matching edges up in our painting is because the primary issue of planning our washes hasn't received enough due care and attention. I'm going to show you how to make those washes, and essentially there's three separate ways of doing it. We will use a wet on wet technique, we will use a wet on dry technique, and we will use a wet to wet technique. Don't worry about the definitions at this stage, because I will explain those as we go along if they're terms that you're not familiar with. And as I start to build up these washes, you will note that there are 7 separate techniques that I will introduce you to as we make these washes that will help you to manage the edges of shapes and elements in the painting. These 7 techniques are losing edges, defining edges, preserving highlights with masking fluid, preserving highlights with negative painting, broken edges, glazing, and using opaque paint. Those 7 techniques will give you a robust toolkit to help you tackle pretty much every subject you want to paint. Now, what we're going to do in this first video is to take a look at why this is a problem. Because you may be saying, I'm not really familiar with this, Ollie. I've never seen this as a particular issue or a particular problem. what actually is the problem that we're trying to resolve here. And I'm going to do a very quick little painting, a little study that will demonstrate to you the issues that we often confront with regard to not planning our washes carefully and not managing our edges in a way that leads itself to a pleasing end result. This is a problem that's specific to watercolour. You don't find this so much with oils, and you don't find it so much with acrylics or pastels, and the reason is watercolour is a transparent medium. You will see why this poses so many problems. Just before we do some painting, a little disclaimer, if you will. This is my way of painting. It is absolutely not the right way of painting. It is not the only way of painting. Every artist has or should have their own way of painting, their own way of expressing themselves. This is very important. So what I'm teaching you is something that I do and something that I have found helpful over the years to help me to be more flexible, to be more versatile as a painter. Now, I've got this funny thing going on up here, which is it's quite artistic and it's quite creative, but my mind is also analytical and logical. And you may think, well, I had no idea that painting was so academic and analytical, Ollie, but it is for me. And I've found that over the years in teaching watercolour, people appreciate sometimes a structured and analytical approach to something that is a very individual and a very creative exercise. So as you watch this, understand that all I'm really doing is giving you the tent poles for you to put your own sheet over the top and finish the tent. I found those tent poles to be pretty secure and they've really helped me out. So hopefully you'll find the same too. But I just thought I'd mention that because everybody has their own different way of doing things, and that's perfectly okay. Well, that's quite enough talking. Let's get stuck in and start some painting. Now, I've made a quick little sketch here, and I'm going to do two different paintings of this scene. I say paintings, two quick little studies of this scene, because what it does is it highlights some of these issues that we have to contend with when we paint in watercolour. As I mentioned previously, the biggest problem that we have when we paint in watercolour is that it's a transparent medium, and that means what we've painted we can then see through a wash that we paint on top. Now in this scene I've got some sky here, and then there's this background ridge of hills. Even though I haven't shaded them in, the hills are going to be sort of blue-grey and a similar tonal value to the sunlit side of these trees here. You can see it's lighter here, and then darker on the shadow side. The sunlight is coming in from this side. Now there's a couple of things that I want you to consider here. The first is that I want this tree on the right-hand side to sit in front of the tree behind it. You can see that there's a nice crisp edge on the left-hand side of this tree, sunlit here, and then there's the shade of the tree behind it, creating an edge here, dark, light. We're going to need to find a way of painting that. And what I'm going to do in the first painting is paint it in such a way that it would appear perhaps that I haven't put much thought or planning into the sequence of washes that I'm putting onto the paper. And a wash is nothing more than just an application of paint to an area. There's nothing more technical to it than that, if it's a term you're not familiar with. But I want you to think that perhaps I haven't given it much thought, or perhaps I don't have much experience. Of course, in doing so, I'm going to overemphasize some of these problems just to make the point. So here we've just got a simple line drawing that outlines the different shapes. And what I'm going to do first of all is paint the sky. I know enough about what I'm doing to know that this is the sky and it comes down to the hilltop here. So let's just mix up some French ultramarine, a little bit of light red, and we'll apply that to the paper. Nice big brush. The paper's at a slight angle here, and we're going to allow that to come down the paper. A little bit more light red. Let's warm it up as we get down towards the hill. And we can see where the sky stops and the hill starts. And that is where we will finish our sky. I also know enough to not paint the hillside now because I'm worried that it might run up into the area of sky, and I don't want that. I want there to be a nice definition between sky and hillside. So I'm going to let the sky dry before I start painting the hill. Okay, now I've mixed up a greeny grey for the hill in the background here. A little bit of raw sienna and French ultramarine, and there's a little bit of light red in there too. Now, I know enough about painting in watercolour to know that I need to be careful when I paint the hill in here, because if my grey-green colour overlaps the blue, you'll be able to see it as a darker line where the two create a darker tone when they overlap. So I need to be very careful, but that's okay. I'm okay at using a brush and I should be fine. Also, I want to make sure that I paint around these trees because I know that the sunlit side on the left-hand side of the trees, I want that to be really nice and bright green. So I don't want this sort of grey-green colour to show through. So let's just start painting this, and I'm being very careful here as I go up here. And oh no, hang on, whoops, I've gone over the line. Yeah, you can see it's just darker there, which I didn't really want. So I don't want to make that mistake again. And so I think the only way to do this is just not go quite as far up to the blue so that I don't have an overlap. Oh no, we've got another little overlap there, and better just make sure I don't go up too far. Okay, that's fine. And then I'll come down around this area here of trees. I'm going to make it a little more grey by adding some light red. And I'll paint around this tree here. Nice jagged edge to it because there's lots of leaves and twigs and things like that there, and we want that to look nice. Bring this down underneath the trees. I'm okay painting over where the trunks are because I'm going to paint those in nice and dark, so that's fine. They'll be okay on top of this particular wash, but I'm just not confident enough with regard to the greens in the tree that I'll be able to do that. So let's bring this down and we'll finish it where the field starts that the trees are growing in. And then that's our background hill done. Nice. Now I just need to get rid of that area of paint that's collecting and pooling there by putting a dryish brush in. And that's fine. I've painted the background hill. Now I'm in a position, once that's dried, to paint these two trees and the field here that runs underneath the hill. It's a shame really that I've got that little overlap there. You can see it's a darker tone. You can see that it is there where these two have overlapped, and this is an issue that we have with watercolour. Because it's transparent, when you put one value on top of another value, it doubles the tonal value. We can see the blue through the green, and so it is darker here. My way of countering it was to leave a gap, and that is essentially the two ways of managing two shapes butting up next to each other. Or is it? Maybe we'll find out when we do the second version of this that there's another way, a better way perhaps, of managing these two edges meeting each other. Okay, so I'm carrying on here in this guise that I feel like I know what I'm doing, but let's see how things turn out. I feel like I know enough about watercolour painting that I should be painting my lights before my darks. So when I look at these two trees here, I think I must paint this tree first, of course, because this side of the tree is lighter than the shadow on the other side. So let's do that. Let's pick up some of this nice bright green. I've mixed some gamboge with some French ultramarine, and I'm going to paint this tree in and get that edge established there. That's nice. And I want to be careful as I come round here again that I don't overlap, because I'm going to get that double value again. Oh, yeah, just done it there. Oh dear. Yeah, problem. So again, now I think I'm going to have to leave a bit of a white gap there. I don't like that dark area. I've also got some darker green here. It's the same two colours, but I've just added a little bit of neutral tint in to darken that up. A bit more light green in here, and then let's finish off the tree with this nice dark green on this side. Making sure that I don't create too many problems here, too many overlaps. Because this is a dark colour, I feel more confident coming up to the colour behind it. And I can do that, that's okay. Let's put some leaves down here, why not? It's a nice little bit of detail. Now, while I've got these paints mixed up, I'm also going to paint in the field. And let's use this nice sunlit green again, and we'll come along here up to the hill, or where the hill stops, I should say. And again, I'm trying to make sure there's not too much overlap, but you can see here it's gone over again, but it's okay. Try to be as careful as I can. Let's put some darker value in there too. And that's it. I'm going to leave that now to dry, and then I can put in the final tree, put in some of these trunks and branches, and then we're done. Okay, so that tree's now dry. I'm going to paint in the second tree using the same colours, and it's very much the same thing. So I'll start painting the sunlit colour because I know enough about what I'm doing to paint from light to dark. I'm trying to be careful not to overlap with the hill behind. Just as I said it. Look what's happened. And then I want this sunlit area to stand out against the shadow on this side of the tree, and so we'll go in with some nice dark green and we'll paint around this edge very carefully. I've got a nice brush here that points well, so hopefully I'll be okay. I'm trying to be as careful as I can, but it's difficult because this edge it's random, it's not a straight edge. But even then, you know, straight edges aren't always plain sailing, as we saw when we were painting the hill and the sky. And there we are, I think that's okay. Finish off with the darks. And then what I can do to finish off here is just put in some darks for the trunks. So we'll use a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of ultramarine, gives us a nice dark brown. And there we are, that's running up into the tree. That's okay, that's fine. And of course, we'll just put in a fence post or two here for good measure. There we are. Finished. Well, you might say that's not too bad. That's okay, I'd be happy with that. Well, there's a number of reasons why you might. You know, the washes are quite fresh. It's not too bad. But I wonder, have we managed the edges in a way that makes this look more unified, less staccato would be a good word to use a musical term when music gets quite short and sharp and pointed. This is how this painting looks to me. There's a lot of hard edges here, and I can see that perhaps, I don't know, maybe it wasn't painted with a very confident hand here, because there's a bit of overlapping going on and there's some little white edges that have been left. And you know, how do we close those up? I don't know. Is there anything we can do now? I mean, we surely can't paint that gap away, because then we're just going to have even more overlap. So we've probably done as much as we can. And while it's okay, I think there's a much better way for us to manage these edges coming together. So let's have a look at that on the second sheet of paper. Okay, now I've got some French ultramarine and a little bit more light red mixed up to do the sky. And if you recall, I finished the sky where the hill started. Consequently, once that was dry, I then had to try and match the top of the hill to the bottom of the sky. There were two edges that I had to try to match up. What if there was only one edge? Let me show you how you might be able to achieve that. Oh, that's quite a dark blue. Let's just lighten that up a bit. That looks a bit too stormy, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is I come down towards the hill, which is darker in tonal value than the sky. I'm going to keep painting over the top of the hill, but I'm not going to come down too far into the trees at this stage. I'm just going to get a brush that's full of clean water, and while this is still very wet, I'm just going to allow that edge to come down the paper, and it just disappears. It just runs out here into clear water. This isn't the only way to do this, incidentally, but I'm just doing it for the purpose of this demonstration. And now what you can see is there's no edge. There's the sky, and it just merges into nothing. Now, because I want a crisp edge to the top of the hill, what that means is that once this is all dried, I can paint that in, and I am only painting one hard edge. There isn't a hard edge here at the moment. I will simply paint the top of the hill, and that will mean I'm not matching two hard edges to each other. And this is a critically important tip for you to take away from this first video. And I've mentioned it before in other videos, and it's simply this. Establish an edge just once with the application of your darkest tone. So in the context of the hill, there's no edge there at the moment. It's just a soft edge where I've blended it out with clear water. I will establish the edge just once when I paint the hill on top of it. If you can keep that at the forefront of your mind when you're painting watercolour, it becomes so helpful. It doesn't necessarily work everywhere in a painting, but more often than not, if you can establish an edge just once with the application of your darkest tone, you're onto a winner. Now, what I want to avoid when I paint the hill is the problem that I had in the first exercise. If you recall, I painted around the trees, let the hill dry, then painted the trees in second, and I had this issue again of having to match up two separate edges. Let's see if there's a way that I can paint this area such that I establish the edges just once with the application of my darkest tone. Now what I'm going to do is paint with the paper flat, and that will just help me to manage the paint a little bit different. I'll show you what I mean. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this whole area all in one go. There will be some additional areas to define once it's all dried, but at this point in time I'm only thinking about the edges here, apart from the top of the hill, as being quite fluid and soft, and I will paint them and allow them to run into each other to an extent. And I'm going to use two different brushes for this. I'm going to mix a nice grey colour for the hill, so a bit of French ultramarine, some raw sienna gives me that nice green grey colour, which is what I want for the hill. And then I've still got this bright green colour here on the palette, which I will use for the bright green areas of the trees. So let's start with the hill, and you can see here I'm just establishing that edge once with the application of the darkest tone. Right? I don't have to worry about anything. There's no issues here with regard to overlaps or white gaps. I'm just painting one edge. It's so much easier. Let's put a little bit more yellow into here. And I'm coming down roughly where those trees are. I'm keeping this all very wet. I'm working with a large brush. And then what I'm going to do with my second brush is put these light areas in and let them run in to the hill. Now, because these are a very similar tonal value, one isn't going to run into the other too much. They'll stay roughly where I put them. Ideally, I'll be using a larger brush than this. In fact, let's go back over to this brush, and we can do that because we know that this side of the trees is a bit darker, so that's okay. Let's just make sure that's nice and bright green in there for the sunlit side of the tree. And then we'll finish underneath the trees where the hill is. I'm letting this all run in together. It requires a good technique to be able to paint this way. And then as I come to the field or the bottom of the hill, what I'm going to look for is a broken brush stroke that I'll just drag down into the field like that. and so that the edge at the bottom of the hill is broken. I'm not going to have to match up a line that runs along here with another line on top of the field. I can use something called a glaze to finish off the field area. I'll show you how that's all going to come together as soon as it's dried. But hopefully you can see that by painting like this, I've avoided that problem between sky and hill. You can see that I've got the trees highlighted pretty much where they are. I'm not too worried about ultimate precision. The landscape's not like that, but it allows me an opportunity to then define other areas once this is all dried. And I will do that by applying the darkest tone to create an edge just once. Let's let it dry. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is show you how to put a glaze over here. And a glaze really is just a light wash over an area that is already painted, or in this case, partially painted. You can see these broken brush strokes have meant that the edge that runs along the bottom of the hill is very undefined. It's ragged by dragging the brush quickly across the paper. What that means is that I can now apply the colour of the field here, and yes, this is overlapping, but it's not overlapping a straight line. It's overlapping a broken area that is suggesting grass and texture, and it just looks rather good. Let's go all the way along here, bring this down, glaze over this area of broken brush strokes, and then we have a field that sits more comfortably with the hill behind it. We've got these areas here that could be shadows under the tree, or it could be little tufts of grass growing in the field, whatever your imagination wants it to be. But what we don't have is a straight line all the way along the bottom here and a straight line along the top of the grass, and the two fighting each other, and us trying to have to manage that by either not overlapping or leaving some white gaps. This just looks more organic, it looks more natural, and it's a far more pleasing result. Now, as that's drying up, I can start to define these trees. I've got this sunlit area on the left here, which is perfectly okay. I want to leave that, but I want a shadow area on the other side too. What I don't want is for the shadow area to have some hard edges where it blends into the sunlit area. How do we do that? Well, in a reverse method that we used on the sky, I can put some water into this area and then paint a darker tone into it. Let me show you how that works. Here we go. This is all dry, so I can put water on here. It has to be very clear because you don't want little tide marks with dirty water ending up on your paper. So crystal clear water, wet this side of the tree, and then let's drop in some dark green to define the right-hand side of the tree. You see, that's just running into the sunlit area. It's rather nice. But I haven't wet it on the extreme of the tree here, so that I can just simply suggest leaves, little gaps in the tree there, some broken brush strokes. I'm not having to match it up to an area of hill that I've painted around the tree. So again, it's a more natural result. You'll notice that I haven't painted a defined edge on this side of the tree, and that is because this tree, when I paint it, will do that job. Now I can do the same thing on this tree on the left-hand side that's behind this one on the right. So again, nice clear water painted onto the left-hand side of the tree, and then let's go in with some darker tone. Now, what I'm going to do is approach this edge, and as I mentioned to you previously, we are going to establish this edge, this broken edge of the tree here, just once with the application of our darkest tone. So let's get it nice and dark and drop it in here. And then what I'm going to do is be quite careful with my brush strokes and use them to define a rough edge here. And you will see this all over my paintings where I pick out the edge of a tree, not by painting the edge of that tree itself, but by painting what is behind it, which is a darker value. And this is a technique that we describe as negative painting, i.e. we are painting this shape here by not painting it. We're painting something else, but in doing so, it describes this shape on the right hand side. And we can cut into it here. Like so. Let's have some darker areas at the bottom here. While that's wet, I can go into there with some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Letting that all run together, which always looks rather nice. I'll do the same here. Should have probably done that while that was still wet, but that's okay. And then with a damp brush, I'll just allow that to merge into the top of the field so they sit down there nicely. And you can see what I've got here is two clearly defined trees, but let's have a look at the edges. We've got a crisp defined edge on this side of the tree, this sunlit side, by negatively painting a dark area next to it, or behind it if you like. On the left hand side of this tree, we've allowed that edge to be lost. It's a similar tonal value to the hill, but you can see the hue is completely different. This is a cool green, this is a bright green. Do we need to explicitly spell out that edge? You could do, but you don't have to. That's your artistic interpretation. I'm going to leave it as it is. It's the same here. Should we have painted and defined the top edge of this tree here? We could have done, but we don't really need to. Allow the eye to fill that in and it becomes a slightly more pleasing experience for the viewer. So here we are. Here's the two different versions. So this one here has its merits, but perhaps it looks as though we've just gone around filling in the pencil shapes that we drew. Sky, hill, leave some gaps, paint in the trees, stop, paint the field in. It just looks a bit stop-start to me, and that's evident by the overlaps and the white gaps giving the game away. Here we don't have any of that. Because we lost the edge when we painted the blue sky, we were able to paint the hill over the top, establishing that edge just once. There was no need to match up two edges. As we painted the hill, we dropped in colour for the trees at the same time and allowed those to merge and fuzz into each other. That creates quite a nice soft effect. It looks a little more painterly. Once it had dried, we were able to define the edges that we wanted to. And the reason that we are able to do that, the reason we have the luxury of picking out or losing the edges that we want, is because we've planned our washes. So that's just a quick introduction really to where we're going to go in this series of videos. Next time we'll be having a look at the scene of the River Arun in Sussex. It's a beautiful scene. I'm really looking forward to painting it. I'm quite nervous, I'm not going to lie to you, because I have never done or filmed a gallery painting that's gone on to one of my galleries. This one will. I'm going to show you it nuts and bolts from start to finish. And you're going to see how I patch all these shapes together in a complex scene. Hopefully it's going to turn out okay, but I'm a bit nervous, concentrating on what I'm saying and what I'm doing when I'm painting at the same time. Not easy, but hey, it's not easy for you when you're learning watercolour, right? It's difficult. It's a challenging thing to do. So if I can't challenge myself and I'm asking you to challenge yourselves, hey, that's not a fair bargain, in my opinion. Maybe have a go at this little exercise. It's great fun to do, and it will start to introduce you to some of the ideas. But in particular, the takeaway for you from this video is if you can establish an edge just once with the application of your darkest tone, that's pretty good. I'm going to leave it there. I'm looking forward to catching up next time when we'll start analysing the scene and really getting stuck into the main painting. Thanks ever so much for watching. If you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed, please click the subscribe button. That's really helpful. It makes such a difference. If you click on the little bell icon too, then you'll get a notification each time I release a new video. And also, if you have been subscribed to the channel for quite some time, maybe just click on it again, because I know there's something afoot with YouTube that some subscribers are finding that channels they used to be subscribed to, they're not anymore. So just check that, and if you're not subscribed again, that'd be fantastic. But that's it for now. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I will see you next time.